when we understand who we are. You weren't born a thug. You weren't born to sell drugs. You weren't born to hurt and kill somebody that looks like you, or anybody for that matter. But if you didn't know that, if they taught you that your history began with slavery and that you grew up in the projects, that was just that was a part of being black, no, it's not. It's actually not. You come from excellence. You come from greatness.
Hey YouTube fam, welcome back to another podcast video episode here at On Deck with Throp. I am your host, Winthrop Wellington, and here we have meaningful conversations with people from around the world all about their affiliation with Jamaica. And today I have a very special guest, a friend of the Wellington family, a daughter of a freedom fighter, civil rights activist, comedian, and many, many other things. We have with us the Ayanna Gregory. Welcome to the show, Ayanna.
Thank you.
And today we have a plethora of subjects to talk about.
Yes.
And as I was saying before, this is a conversation. And I feel like this is just going to be like me and you sitting down at the restaurant having a conversation.
I love
So
it.
if you will, I just want to give you the opportunity just to introduce yourself,
Okay.
and then we can take the conversation from there.
Okay. My name is Ayanna Gregory. I am a singer, songwriter, performing artist, educator, activist, motivational speaker.
Amazing, amazing. And as I alluded to in the opening there, your father, Dick Gregory,
Yes.
also an activist, a very well-known activist. And from a personal perspective, I look at that era and that generation of civil rights activists. They're the ones, your father in particular, who gave me, I would say, just opportunities that they never had growing up being a young black person in America. And perhaps maybe I don't really fully understand the magnitude of the impact that they had, but I can certainly tell you it's very much appreciated looking back on that era. And I do want to give you a little bit of an opportunity to tell us and even educate the audience a little bit about exactly who your father is.
Sure. So my father was a famous freedom fighter. He started out as a famous comedian, so he came on the scene in the early 1960s and he became really famous as a comedian. And he was actually the first black comedian to perform in all-white nightclubs. And so he really broke the color line in comedy. So he paved the way, literally, for all of the black comedians that came after him. What happened was that he had this amazing future in Hollywood and this specific trajectory that was being mapped out for him. And in, I would say, maybe about 1962, Medgar Evers, another powerful freedom fighter who, like Martin Luther King, was assassinated in the 1960s. But at this time, Medgar Evers was down in Jackson, Mississippi. And, they would call on the celebrities to bring attention to the movement because it was obviously a very dangerous time. And the more cameras were there might be a chance, one, that there'll be less violence on the part of the police. And also there may be a chance that this footage could go around the world. And so he called on my father, who at that time, again, was a famous comedian, and asked him to come down to Jackson, Mississippi. And my father marched and demonstrated, and his life was never the same. He literally, for the most part, walked away from comedy as he knew it at that time. And so he began missing, club dates and theater dates. And because he was, demonstrating, he was marching, he was getting arrested, he was going to jail. And people thought he was completely crazy. Here's this man who's, in his prime, making more money than he could dream of, and with the promise of making even more. And he said, I don't need it. If my people aren't free, it means nothing to me. So It was really absolutely a life of sacrifice that he lived. And so, he raised us in that way. There are 10 of us, 7 girls, 3 boys. I'm the youngest girl, so I'm number 9 out of 10. And actually, I take that back. There are 11, and sometimes I forget to include a brother that I never knew who died before I was born. He was my father's namesake. And so I'm really, one of 11 children. So Dad's journey was extremely powerful. And so clearly was my mom's, and my mom is still alive. For those who don't know, my father is now an ancestor. He transitioned in 2017. My mother, who's in her 80s, is still here and kicking, and she also, as a mother of the movement, paved the way and did a lot of things that, the people didn't hear about because she was just, one of those unsung sheroes. And so I represent both of them. But yeah, and then also I would be remiss if I didn't also add that my father was a huge part of the holistic health and vegetarian movement in the country, and specifically in the Black community. So there's no shortage of people who walk up to me on a regular and say, me, my children, my grandchildren are vegetarians because of your dad. So he had a big part of his push was around health and wellness and holistic health. And so that was also, a big part of his legacy.
And with the health and wellness, from what I understand back then, and maybe to a certain extent even now, that wasn't a priority back then, of eating healthy and putting your body number one, especially in the Black community.
It was not fun. Can I just tell you?
I
please tell you?
I can imagine.
In the 1970s? Yeah. I mean, we were already literally the weirdest kids on the block. You know what I mean? Like, so, here we were. Our parents were freedom fighters. Our phone lines were literally tapped. The FBI had a file on my dad a mile long. And we knew this. At kids, I remember, joking on the phone, talking to the FBI, like, we know you're listening. So it was like, because they didn't keep a lot from us, but it was almost like in that way they defamed the potency of the danger that we were really in. There were several assassination attempts on my father's life.
Oh, my goodness.
All kinds of things that, it would take days to talk about, but I assure you, it was an interesting ride, a powerful ride, a fun ride, a scary ride, but one that I am so proud of. But yeah, growing up, with the vegetarian piece, oh my God, I'm like, why, Dad? Why? Because we're like guinea pigs. This movement. I mean, when I think of how the vegan world is now, I'm like, do y'all know how easy it is to be a vegan now?
Man, right.
In the 70s. Nobody wanted to switch lunches with me. They were like, your food smells funny. What is that? Why do you have that green stuff? Like, it just was a whole different time.
Wow. I mean, talk about changing the trajectory of time, right? Or where we could have been. I mean, I think that's amazing. And I think that is kind of not underwritten, but I mean, less understood than the other parts of your father in terms of the impact that he had.
I agree. Yeah.
So with that, I mean, obviously that shaped who you were and who you are now. Not just obviously the nutritional aspect, but even in your introduction of yourself, you said you are a freedom fighter to this day.
Yes.
How are you doing that in these days?
So it's interesting because, growing up, Dad took us, he wasn't home a lot, but oftentimes we would go on the road with him. And I would always say that I'm literally, I think, the only sibling that has never gone to jail, marching and demonstrating.
Really?
And in my house, it was like a badge of honor. I was like, I want to go to jail. I want to go to jail. Like, what? So it was just a thing. You just had to be in that vibration to understand, like, it really was a badge of honor to say, like, I am willing to sacrifice for humanity, for my people and for humanity, literally. And so, going on the road, marching, demonstrating, having, I remember, my two of my sisters, Paula and Zenobia, were in Greenwood, Mississippi, at like 13 and 14, and watching their life flash before them. Wow. Because the Ku Klux Klan was there. They were armed soldiers with guns pointed at them, and they're kids, and they're thinking, oh, we're going to march. It's going to be fun. And then they're literally thinking, like, am I going to die today? And so I grew up with those stories, especially with my older siblings who did way more. I have siblings who were born my older sister was born in the late 50s, 59. And then, my other siblings, the early 60s, I didn't come along till 71. So they lived through a lot more than me. But even when I came along, we were marching, we were demonstrating. The first time that I remember speaking publicly, I was like 7.
Wow.
And I was so mad because my 5-year-old brother outdid me. I was pissed. We were like at an anti-nuclear war rally, you know, and there was like tens of thousands of people. I didn't even know my father was famous at that time. I'm just seeing like lights and cameras, and I'm dizzy. I'm like, what is all this, you know? So it was like life with him on the road was very different, you know, because here's this bigger than life icon. And as I began to know who he was, I had to kind of see him from the outside in.
Gotcha.
You know, because he was just dad when he was home. And so, marching and demonstrating. And then, you know, when I went to Howard University, I went to college at Howard. And so that was like the early 90s. And it was like a renaissance of the 60s at that time. It was powerful. And it was like, you know, that was Public Enemy. And, you know, that was the time in hip hop and rap where it was like power to the people.
Right.
So there was so much knowledge of self on the table. So many Black students who really were like, I want to know where I come from. So I went to Howard at that time. My father was also back and forth between Washington, D.C. and where we grew up in Plymouth, Massachusetts. So he was in D.C. I saw him more as an adult because he was always in D.C.
I see.
And so, you know, he would have me with him all the time, me and my other brothers, Christian and Johanse, who also lived in Washington, D.C., and also my sister, Miss, who went to Georgetown Law. She was in D.C. too. So those of us who were in D.C. as adults, we spent a lot of time with him. So I would be, you know, marching, demonstrating, singing. And once he realized, he didn't know I could sing until, was it Kathy Hughes? He was doing a radio show with Kathy Hughes, and she was like, I have a surprise for you. And then she brings me on, this is all radio, so he can't see me, and I'm singing, and he's like, wow, okay. And she's like, that's your daughter. And he's like, he had no clue, you know?
That's
and so
amazing.
once he realized that I could sing, then he began to also take me with him to be a musical part of the movement. So that's when I began to develop, you know, not only as an activist demonstrating and marching, but also like, okay, what is going to be my musical focus? You know, if I have a voice, I'm not going to just use it just to sing R&B or just to sing this genre, that genre. Like, I want to learn the spirituals. I want to learn the protest songs. I want to know the songs that my parents sang so that I can sing those songs and write new songs that speak to our struggle and that speak to, you know, our transformation and this, you know, revolution, whether you want to call it visible or invisible, but it has been, you know, a powerful, you know, I mean, I'm almost 50, I'll be 50 in October, but just in my, you know, short life, what I have witnessed, you know, in our country has been amazing. And so to be able to be a part of the movements has been powerful. And one other thing that I would say about how I've lent my voice as an activist, it has shifted over time. Because I would say when I was in my 20s, I had more energy. So, you know, I was on the ground with more direct action. When George Floyd was murdered and that video went around the world, and Breonna Taylor, when all of those, you know, Ahmaud Arbery, when it was like the world just exploded all at once in May of 2020, at the end of May, my spirit led me differently. So my norm would have been to hit the streets. And something was telling me, this isn't it for you now. And it felt weird. It felt like I was being irresponsible because I'm seeing my peers and my comrades like, where you at? We out here, you know, getting tear gassed and arrested. And, you know, the children, you know, there were some young people who were in the streets who had never marched before, something that moved them in a way that they had never been moved. They will never be the same. And so I thought, well, I gotta be with them. But what happened is what my spirit was telling me was that as I began moving into musical healing and doing healing work with young people and elders and my people and all people, I began to realize that my role now is really to hold space, hold healing space, and to fill in the voids.
I see.
You know, and so what happened is that I called my friend Nini, who was at the time the direct action lead of Black Lives Matter in DC, and I said, Nini, you know what I do. Tell me what to do. And she said, we need you. She said, these babies are hurting. They're traumatized. They've never experienced anything like this before. But their lives are changing in an amazing way, too. So she connected me with a church that was near what is now Black Lives Matter Plaza. And it was a safe house. And it was where, they had medical supplies, and it was just a place where people could kind of escape the police and things like that. And so I set up camp there, and brought my music and my sage and my sound system and my Tibetan singing bowls and things like that. And I would begin, snatching folks off the street, especially the young folk, to say, I got you, And so we would hold spaces, and they would just cry and release. And, I remember this one young sister who's now a mentor of mine. She was 19, maybe 20 at the time. And she said, I was so scared because we were getting, beat up and arrested and tear gassed and, the rubber bullets, and people were getting seriously hurt. And she said, all of a sudden, I just wasn't afraid anymore. And the feeling of like, I know I could die today, and I'm not afraid anymore. Their lives changed. And so I was there kind of as a big sister, someone who had been in that position, in my 20s and 30s, and said, now I get to hold space for you, because I want you to understand that you're in combat mode, and I understand why, but you also have to understand when it is a time for you to release that anger and release all the hurt that you're feeling, and to be able to take a soft space back to you. Because sometimes people don't know how to turn that off. If you have that anger and the hurt, and then you bring it into your home, well, then what have you done? You have just perpetuated really the larger impact of racism, white supremacy. My father, as a freedom fighter, was powerful. Oftentimes he was angry, he was fiery, and he was also loving and lovable. He was able to be loving with us, and loving to my mother. So I needed them to understand that you have to be a balance.
Right.
You got to be fire and water. Because I don't want you to burn your house down.
Right. And
so that's really when I began to find new wings as a big sister, healer, musician, someone to hold space for them. And that's really what I do now. I enter spaces in Washington, D.C. When I look at the effects of what I would call racism, white supremacy, you see all of the people who have been killed by the police, or just harassed by the police, or in some way negatively affected by police in America. And then you see our children killing each other, right? And so some people say, well, nobody's talking about the fact that we're killing each other. And I say, well, the same system that taught white people to hate black people taught black people to hate black people. So it comes from the same place. It literally comes from the same place. And if we want to do something about it, we have to teach us to know us. When we understand who we are, you weren't born a thug. You weren't born to sell drugs. You weren't born to hurt and kill somebody that looks like you, or anybody for that matter. But if you didn't know that, if they taught you that your history began with slavery, and that you grew up in the projects, that was just that was a part of being black. No, it's not. It's actually not. You come from excellence. You come from greatness, and to begin to reprogram, to deprogram, and then re-educate. Like, this is who you actually are, and the choices that you are making, that you think you're making as an individual, you're not. The choices and, the clothes you're choosing, all these things is based on what other people have taught you and the trends that you're looking at. And so you're being fed something, the music that you love. I mean, they've taken so much of, when you think about pop music from like the 1960s, Stevie Wonder was pop music in the 1960s. Well, let's look at 1960s to now, specifically in the black community. What does that look like? The dumbing down of music. And so I look at it, I'm always coming from my father's perspective. Where have they infiltrated to affect black and brown people to do harm to themselves, not just to, so I know I went off on a tangent, but just to say that, coming back around, that now really it is me holding space, healing space, and to say, in the midst of everything that's going on, we still get to be co-creators. We don't have to be reactors. We can be impactors. We can be manifestors. And so that's really, I think, what I feel most called to do now.
No, that must be an amazing feeling, because that's incredibly powerful that this is in your blood, obviously, born and raised in this, and then to be able to transition and mature from a boots on the ground activist to a point where you're using your innate musical talents to impact and in the case that you just explained, heal those that are where you were once, and being a boots on the ground activist. I mean, I think that's an incredibly powerful thing, and I don't know how that must make you feel, but I'm sure it's what would I say, just maybe a little bit meta, right? You're just you're seeing yourself in these young activists, but now you're their guide.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I don't know if I've ever said this to you before, but I mean, like, thank you, thank your family as well for just everything that they've done for our community. And again, like I said earlier, who knows where my life would be, what opportunities I may or may not have without the commitment of your dad and your family. So it's definitely super, super appreciated from me. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Wow, that means a lot. Thank
Absolutely,
you.
absolutely. Now, you are a frequent visitor to Jamaica, and you've been coming for many, many years.
Yes.
When was the first time that you came to Jamaica?
I think it was either 97 or 98.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which part did you come to?
Negril.
Negril, okay. And has this always been the area that you came to?
I mean, I've been to other places in Jamaica, but Negril is just my spot. I mean, you know what I'm saying? That's just what it is. I remember when I came, it was 97, 98, and my god sister, Free, who oftentimes we come together, she had been coming to Jamaica, probably, maybe from the 80s. And I had heard about different retreats that were happening in Negril. A lot of African Americans were doing retreats, raw food, vegan retreats, spiritual retreats, yoga retreats, and a lot of them were happening at that time. Some of them were happening, of course, at Jackie's on the Reef, which I hadn't been to yet, but the Treehouse Resort. And that's where I stayed. That was my first time coming to Jamaica, first place I stayed, and loved it. Loved it, loved it,
Awesome,
loved it.
awesome.
It was amazing.
I guess back then you were more coming as a tourist.
Yes.
And coming for the retreats, having a good time, enjoying Jamaica, enjoying Negril. And now in recent years, your purpose for coming here has shifted a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I can. Your father changed that for me. I am so grateful to say. So, when we first started coming, we're staying at Treehouse. A couple times we may have stayed at Coco La Palm and the Palms. And then, I had at that point had gotten acquainted with Jackie at Jackie's on the Reef. So, spending time there, which was just amazing. Yep. That's like my healing oasis, period.
Same.
Right?
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's just the spot. And so I would say maybe 5 years ago, my sister Free and I, at the time, I'm sure we had a little bit of money, like, all right, but we got to get to Jamaica. All right, we got to make this work. And so we were looking for places to stay. And we were like, well, I don't know if we were on what we had gone on, booking.com or something, and we were like, travelers keeps coming up, let's try it. Let's just try it. Let's see if that's a good spot to go. So we booked a room at Travelers here. And I can just say, like, one of the things that I grew to love about this place is that, one, I don't feel like a tourist. And it's not just because of the work with your dad that I'll talk about. It's because I feel like, one, I love that Jamaicans stay here, and a lot of African Americans stay here. And, people from all over the world, of course. But so I guess in a place, because, of course, Negril is a tourist spot. And so it can be easy to feel like a super tourist in Negril or Mobay or wherever, the hot spots are. But I think it literally, I just feel like it's family, where people who don't know each other, like, hey, what's your name? How you doing? What do and then before you know it, you have like a whole set of new friends. Every time you come, you meet a whole new group of people. And that's just the vibe here, period. And I know everybody says that. And so that's the first thing we noticed, that it was just easy, that it was like, you home, family vibe. And so the night that we got here, I remember meeting one of your dad's friends. Of course, I didn't know who was who. And I was telling him, I said, I've been coming to Jamaica for all these years, but I really want to go into the schools. I would love, I'm an educator. I do motivational speaking, and I'm really good with kids, and I haven't made the connection yet to get into the schools here. And he said, meet me here for breakfast tomorrow morning at 9:00. There's someone I want you to meet. I was like, okay. So here come breakfast, and I meet your father. He doesn't say that he built this resort. Your dad, he's just, so humble, and y'all get that from him. And so the more he's talking, I'm realizing, oh, this is your place. You built this from the ground up. And he's so busy talking to me about the other work he's doing. He's talking to me about NEAT and the work with the children and the schools and building the libraries and working with families and, changing children's lives. And I was like, okay, wow. He said, do you want to go to some schools? I'll take you to some schools. When are you ready? Tomorrow? I'm like, yeah. So he takes me, I can't remember the first school we went to. The names are escaping me, but we went to, it was a basic school.
Okay.
And so he, of course, he didn't know what I could do. He didn't know, like, he's just taking a chance. Like, okay, you want to go? We go. And so, I just kind of jumped in and did my thing. And honestly, I really didn't know how it was going to go, particularly when I began to tell the stories around civil rights, because I just didn't know how does that translate here. I had never really told those stories outside of the U.S.
Gotcha.
And so initially I wasn't including that in any of my presentations. I was just, doing call and response and singing, because I can sing, I always lead with that. And
these are your presentations here in Jamaica.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And so I would sing, and I would do, I have a children's album called I Dream a World. So I was doing a lot of music with them and getting them up and moving. And, I am somebody special, somebody caring, somebody sharing, somebody daring to live, somebody daring to love. So I was doing those kinds of things. And I don't know at what point, maybe it was me sharing with your father a little bit of the history and some of the stories from I have a play called Daughter of the Struggle, and it's about growing up as a child of the civil rights movement. So I began doing some excerpts.
That's my favorite, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, I love that one.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt your story, but I mean, the first time I heard you and saw you perform it, like goosebumps like crazy, and I started tearing up. Like, not even kidding. I was
really?
Like, I mean, like, I knew you were talented. I knew you could sing, but I mean, just the way you brought that part of your life. I mean, you brought me to that bridge, you brought me right there. And I was just like, man, it was just an incredibly powerful, I don't know if you want to call it a solo play or what you call it, but I mean, man, just even thinking about it gives me goosebumps.
Wow.
So my absolute favorite performance that you had.
That means so much to me. It does. Because I didn't know how that would translate. And so when I started, sharing it with your dad, he insisted that everywhere I went, whether it was at, when he eventually had me performing at the NEAT graduations, or just in the schools, or even, like for his birthday party, I felt awkward because I was like, well, are you sure he was like, you have to, you must do it. And so he helped me because in my mind, I was a little narrow. There was a little bit of narrow thinking around where I thought these stories would be appropriate.
I see.
And he literally had me do them everywhere. And somehow it always rolled over. Somehow it always landed, at least with, maybe not everybody, but at least enough people that it made sense. And so, because I was a little shy at times, like, are you sure you want me to tell those stories here? Yes. And so it was just powerful. So then to be able to go to, the all age schools, go into the high schools, go up into the hills, because once I began performing at the graduations, then those principals would reach out to me and say, we want you to come to our school. And so some of those principals would just come and get me. And, I remember seeing so much more of the country, just traveling, in the hills and into country. And just being able to spend time with those children. And it was funny because, I would do the presentation and then, it'd be lunchtime and I would be sitting under a tree and all the children would gather around me like, she's eating lunch now. And I'm like, hi, do you want some of my food? Yes. And they're just like, they had their own food, but they were just like,
right.
Here's this Black woman from America, and particularly those who weren't closer to the cities, it wasn't often that they got to see folks not from around their way. And so, so that part, I'm like, I could never be a tourist again in Jamaica because that's just gone. I mean, even to the point that here, laying out on the beach, right? And, you have the vendors coming through selling their jewelry and their food and the all of their artistry, the wooden sculptures and all the beautiful things that they sell. And there was a woman who came by and she was selling some beadwork, waist beads, anklets and things like that. And at the time I was like, I have a lot of them already, not today. And then she's looking and she's like, oh, I remember you. And I'm like, you sure? And so her daughter had graduated from
look at that.
NEAT. And do you know she remembered all the stories? She's telling me about the bridge and crossing the bridge, when I tell the story of my sisters crossing the bridge in Greenwood, Mississippi, and them being afraid, but marching for their freedom. And she's even singing some of the songs. And I'm like, you remember that?
Wow, amazing.
She remembered it. I almost cried. I was just so blown away. And so it made a human connection. And I said, you know what? Here, so I gave her some money. I said, I just want to support what you're doing. I had a lot of jewelry that I had purchased from someone else the day before, but it was no longer a transaction, It was like, I see you and you see me, and, you could be my auntie or my mother, my grandmother, or, you know what I mean? And so it's that for me now, to be able to talk to the teenagers here, to hear what's on their mind. Sometimes I go to the schools and the principal will be like, I want you to talk to the girls. They'll tell you some things they won't tell us. And I was like, but they don't know me. And they're like, trust me, they're going to tell you some things. And sure enough, the girls couldn't wait to talk about, the boys and, everything going on in their life. And then they want to know things about me as a singer and who I know. And so it just brings the conversation closer. And then I will go back to the principal and say, these are some things that are on their mind. And these are some things that they're feeling a way about that you might want to consider. And so it just is amazing. And so your father literally changed my life in Jamaica. Like, life in Jamaica as I knew it is completely different now because of Winston Wellington.
My dad will do that to you.
Yes, he will.
So where can people find out more about you, follow up with you with any questions that they may have? If you can just give us some of your social and contact information. Absolutely.
So I'm on Facebook and Instagram. On Facebook, it's just my name, Ayanna Gregory, and Ayanna is spelled Ayanna Gregory. So I'm easy to find on Facebook. On Instagram, my handle is I'm Ayanna Gregory. Not I am, but I'm. So I am, and then Ayanna Gregory. And same for Twitter. I'm not really on Twitter much, but I do have a Twitter account, and so it's I'm Ayanna Gregory for both Twitter and IG. And like I said, Facebook. So I'm on Facebook and Instagram. My website is ayannagregory.com. I'm on YouTube. I don't have a lot of great stuff on YouTube, mostly stuff other people did. That's something that I really want to begin to build, my visual presence. My music is on iTunes. I'm pretty easy to find musically and otherwise. And yeah, that's pretty much, I'm pretty easy to find.
Okay, awesome. I'm sure a lot of people will be reaching out and I'm sure listening to your music.